Okay, we are ready for chapter 4. And chapter 4 in this story is called Day 2. Jeb joins in. Did you bring us one of those big statues from the yard? Aunt Pretty asked at dinner that night. I had no idea what she was talking about. She means a wonder, son, said Pa. I wasn't ready to share that crazy doll story. Not yet. I knew Aunt Pretty would want to know all about the curtains and the fancy doodads at the Pritchard's house, but I hadn't noticed a thing but that doll. Well, I'm going to wait and see what I've got at the end of the week, I told them. Oh, and you just know I hate to wait, Aunt Pretty fussed. Pa changed the subject. Mind if I eats? Eben may sail the seven seas, but he'll never find a cook as you, Pretty. And I looked down at the plate of ham, the boiled beans, the fluffy biscuits. I knew a peach pie was waiting in the window sill. Yes, sir, I agreed. For an instant, I felt a pang, picturing myself in Tokyo or Timbuktu, craving one of my aunt's peach pies. Aunt Pretty said, "Oh, go on now," and plopped a big heap of beans on my plate. Have some seconds. I didn't want to disappoint her, no, sir, so I had my second helping and put Timbuktu clean out of my mind. When you're weeding corn up one row and down the next, you have a lot of time to think. So Thursday morning, I thought of that faraway mountain in Silver Creek, Colorado. The more weeds I dug up, the higher that mountain got. And with one wonder under my belt, I was itching to go and search for more, but Pa was working extra hard, and I didn't have the heart to ask him to take time off. Around 3:30, Pa stopped abruptly. That's enough, Eben, he said. I won't be needing you until milking time. So I didn't waste a second. I splashed the dust off my face at the pump and took a nice long drink. I checked that my paper and pencil were in my back pocket, and I headed down Yellow Dog Road with Sal tagging along. And when I reached the edge of the Austins' farm, Jeb came racing toward me, kicking up a cloud of dust. Wait up, I'm coming with you. I looked around. Well, where's the rest of the brood? Maggie said she'd watch 'em, but I've got to dry the dishes tonight in her place. And Jeb didn't want to waste time talking about chores. Any luck with those wonders? I thought his big brown eyes would pop right out of his face when I told him about Mrs. Pritchard. A doll? Well, what kind of wonder is that? A doll that saved somebody's life, I told him. I think that's a wonder, even if it is a peculiar one. You got any better ideas? Jeb shook his head. No, I've never seen anything special except a three-legged cow that my grandpa used to have. Well, that's not man-made, I told him. Nope, and it was just a freak of nature. That's what Grandpa said. So Jeb stooped to pick up the hedge apple and pitched it across the road. I'm going all along the ridge first, I told him, and I told him all about Orville Payne. Ooh-wee, said Jeb, we're lucky he didn't aim a shotgun at you. He'd just as soon shoot you than look at you. I hadn't thought about firearms before. Well, at least I got something. A dull story. Jeb reached down for another hedge apple. This time he put his arm way back and sent it arching high into the air. Hey, if you're looking for something special, we should go down near the sailor house. A rich person is more likely to have a wonder than a poor one, or maybe two or three. The Sailor place, right in town, was the only house in Sassafras Springs that had curlicues and fancy trim and a fine porch that curved all around the side, and not to mention a big steeping porch upstairs. The Sailors had money. Something in short supply everywhere else in town. They owned the feed store, which also dealt in farm equipment, and farmers could do without new clothes, farmers could do without indoor plumbing, and even full bellies, but they could not do without farm equipment. And that's why the Sailors had the biggest house in Sassafras Springs and a Ford motor car in the driveway to boot. Some farmers, like Pa, had old pickup trucks, but the Sailors were the only folks who had a car just to ride around in. Now, I don't know about this, I told Jeb as we gingerly walked up the front steps. There was a window in the door with colored glass in it, put together to look like a rose. Mrs. Sailor may not cotton to boys liking us calling on her. Before I had time to talk myself out of knocking on the door, It swung open, and there was Mrs. Sailor, dressed all in pink and with a big smile on her face. "Hello, young man. I thought I heard footsteps." "Howdy, ma'am," I mumbled. Mrs. Sailor was young, much younger than Mr. Sailor, and her soft brown hair was piled high on her head. "What can I do for you?" Jeb just stared at her, like a cat got his tongue, but I managed to blurt out something that we were looking for wonders. "Well, maybe you'd better come in," she said. And inside the house was so full of furniture and pictures and rugs and lacy things. It looked like a store. It wasn't the place for the likes of Jeb and me. "I'm not sure I have what you're looking for," Mrs. Sailor furrowed her brow, "but I'll have to think." She had us sit on the sofa, decorated with roses. I guess they were her favorite flowers. "You wait here, and I'll be right back." Jeb had yet to say one word. He just sat and stared. And after a while, I heard the rattling of her skirts, and Mrs. Sailor came back carrying a red-stained box. "I suppose this is our best bet," she said, sitting on a fuzzy blue chair across from us. She carefully opened it, pulled out a long strand of pinkish-colored pearls. "These pearls belong to Mr. Sailor's great-grandmother. Aren't they lovely?" She waited for some kind of reaction, so I said, "Yes, ma'am." Well, Jed just nodded. She reached in again and pulled out a circle of small green beads. "And this is a genuine jade from China. Boys, isn't that a wonder?" I leaned in to look at the jade and mumbled something about being nice, though the green glass beads Aunt Pretty wore one at the county fair last year were just as pretty, and they sparkled a whole lot more. Next to Miss Sailor pulled out a brooch, and a brooch is kind of like a pin that you wear. You can pin to your jacket. So Mrs. Sailor pulled out a brooch with the outline of a lady in it, carved in white, and this is my grandmother's hand-carved cameo. Jeb and I made admiring noises. "Who did the carving?" I asked. "Oh, a jeweler maker in Paris," she said in a tone that let me know French jewelry makers were a lot better than the ones in Missouri. "Well, do you think these are wonders?" she asked, biting her lip. Miss Sailor surely was aiming to please. Yes, ma'am," I told her. "They're the finest." Miss Sailor looked relieved. She picked up another box, a cardboard box in the shape of a heart, off the table next to her. "Have a chocolate, boys, all the way from St. Louis." She lifted the lid, uncovering rows of chocolates, round and square and heart-shaped ones. "The round ones are cream-filled, the squared ones are solid chocolate, and the heart shapes have nuts," she explained. Took only a few seconds for my hand to land in a square chocolate while Jeb picked out a cream-filled one. We didn't know what to do next until Miss Sailor said, "I believe I'll have the heart-shaped one." She popped the chocolate in her mouth. "Go ahead, boys," she urged us. So we ate ours, chewing in silence. Oh, I never tasted chocolate like that before. Well, there was nothing left to do but thank Miss Sailor and say our farewells and get out. And as we hurried down the steps, Mr. Sailor arrived home wearing a three-piece suit and a big city hat. "What do these rascals want?" I heard him ask his wife at the door. "Oh, they just came looking for something," she said. "I gave them chocolates." "You are too soft-hearted, Lily," he said, "but that's what makes you so special." "Did you see those pearls? They must have been worth a fortune. And the stones from China, too," Jeb explained, once we were down the road a piece. "They were fine, but they weren't wonders," I told him. Jeb looked just like I told him the sky was red instead of blue. "Why, nothing in Sassafras Springs is worth what that jewelry's worth," he said. "I know, but those three things together aren't worth the one doll, like Mrs. Prickard's. All you can do with a string of pearls is hang 'em around your neck. I think I need to go back to where I left off yesterday. If you're going back up the ridge, the next stop after the Prickards is Coulee Pines. If you go there, you'll be plenty sorry." "Why?" "'Cause that coulee is crazy. Everybody knows it. You go over there, you won't live to see your mountain." Coulee Pone was a bit odd, I agreed, but he was harmless, according to Pa. Jeff did not agree. "Has he got a gun?" I wondered. "Who knows? He's got wild eyes, and he holds his trousers, and trousers are a word for pants. So he holds his trousers up with a rope." What Jeb said was true. I could skip Cooley's place, but I'd kick myself hard if I ended up missing a wonder. "Well, if that's the next place on the ridge, then I'm going there. Come with me. There's safety in numbers," I told Jeb. Jeb stopped in the road and turned to me. "I'll walk up there with you," he said, "but I'm not going in that house." "Deal," I agreed. "Who's that?" Cooley shouted as we approached his shack. Jeb and Sal both hung back when he lurched toward us with an axe in his hand. His eyes lit up as he raised the axe above his shoulder. I closed my eyes as to not watch my own head being chopped off, but when nothing happened, I opened them, just as Cooley rested the axe on the back of his shoulder and showed off his 4 teeth in a wide grin. "Boys, is it? Thought you was the tax collector." "Haven't had a caller in a dog's age. Happy to have you," he said in a loud voice. Cooley tended to shout. "Don't know why more folks don't stop by and visit me." Cooley Pone was a string bean of a man. That a bit of rope couldn't keep his trousers from drooping dangerously low, and the moths made quite a meal out of his felt hat. My mouth was dry as a bone, but I managed to explain what I was looking for, and to my surprise he didn't hesitate a tick when I told him what I wanted. "Oh, yes, indeedy, I got a wonder," he said, as if somebody asked him for one every day. "Yes, sirree." He left his axe on the stump he had been hacking away at, and he motioned for us to follow him in the house. I had never been inside, and neither had anybody else I knew. I was anxious to go in now because Cooley's place, no more than a shack, leaned considerably to the right. Cooley made his living by doing handyman work. The trouble was, not very many people wanted to hire a handyman whose own house was about to cave in. He might not have noticed, but everyone else in Sassafras Springs did. "I'll give it a year," I heard Pa tell Aunt Pretty one day. I quickly tried to remember if a year or more had passed since I'd heard him say that. And on the other hand, a wonder is a wonder, and one more wonder would make me one step closer to the mountain, so I followed him. When I glanced back at Jeb, he rolled his eyes as if to say, "Yeah, right," and I figured I was I figured as if I was going to the Nile or to the Amazon, I'd have to take a few chances against my better judgment, so I forced myself to step inside the crumbling shack. Sal trotted along behind me, and Cooley didn't object. Near the door sat a huge chair covered with a pile of tattered quilts. There was an old pot-bellied stove in the corner and a bunch of wooden crates that Cooley had used for furniture. What caught my eye, though, was this bookcase set dead in the middle of the room. It reached all the way to the ceiling, or should I say the ceiling sagged down around the rest of the bookcase. The wood was split and warped, and the shelves leaned at crazy angles. Every inch was covered with some useless items: bent fishing poles, dusty pop bottles, what might have been an ancient coconut, rusty mouse traps with a piece of cheese so old and so dry even the hungriest rat would pass that by. So Cooley walked up to the bookcase and patted it proud-like. "Yep, this is a guaranteed wonder of the county, even the state, and maybe even a wonder of the whole doggone world." "You're talking about a bookcase?" "Yes, sirree, it's a bookcase," Cooley bellowed. "My prized possession. Had it since I was a boy. Never read me a book, by jiggers." "I have a bookcase. The doggonedest bookcase you've ever did hear of, too." Cooley dropped into the chair, patted the crate next to me to sit down. I didn't have time to worry about whether the roof would fall in or whether the crate would give way. Cooley Pone started his story. So that is chapter 4. We realize now that Cooley Pone is an interesting man. He doesn't have a lot of money. He lives in a shack that's pretty much crumbling down around him. Doesn't get a lot of visitors, doesn't have a lot of work. He has this bookcase. So chapter 5, we'll learn the story behind this bookcase that he calls a wonder.